Recording in progress.
Good morning, Bushla. Are we correcting?
Morning, Tata. Not yet.
Ukhona Sister Tebuho here on the platform. I've been calling her. She's not picking up her calls.
She's on the platform.
Good morning, sir. I'm here.
I've been calling you since 7. You are not picking up my calls. We can't work like that. How many members are in the platform?
We have 5, Chairperson.
Dr. Beck has just joined. Mm.
Buhle, I see Honorable Makubela has joined. How many are we now? We're running behind time.
There are 6 of us now. Tatu Sikwati just joined.
Mm.
No. Good morning, honorable members, the support team, and our stakeholders who are here to make submissions on the bills, the media, and all people who are in the platform. You are all welcome. The meeting is officially open. Do we have apologies?
Yes, so we have apologies from Miss Alexander and Miss Galeka Masibuk.
Okay. Those are the
And
apologies.
Mr. Lekhanyan, sorry. Also Mr. Lekhanyan.
Okay. Item 3. The purpose of the meeting today is for stakeholders to make submissions on the draft rates and monetary amounts and amendment of revenue laws bill, which in short is called the rates bill. So we are processing this bill as Parliament as it is required by the Constitution. Members of the public have to participate in the decision-making in this regard, and they do so by making oral and written submissions. There are those who have sent us written submissions who will not make it this morning for oral submissions. We'll consider those submissions. So those of you who are here in the platform are going to be afforded time. I think it's 15 minutes. Is it so?
Yes,
Would-
it's 15 minutes a participant.
Each stakeholder will be allocated 15 minutes. Can you please time yourself? I don't have to remind you at the end when you are not concluding. Please have a timer in front of you and make sure that within those 15 minutes, you will have made your submission. The first stakeholder is Heineken Beverages. Heineken, over to you.
Good morning, Honourable Chair. Thank you, and also through you, Chair, good morning to the honourable members of the committee, as well as to Treasury and SARS officials, stakeholders and colleagues. I just wanted to check whether I should be putting up my own slides as those had been sent through.
Yes, you should be. I actually sent Marucha a message for that.
Okay, let me. Are you able to see my slides now?
No.
Not yet.
We see your face. We don't see your slide.
Okay. Let me just see why it's not allowing. There we go. Do you see it now?
Yes, we do.
Ah,
Great. Thank you.
we see beers and spirits here. And
Yes,
it's
Honourable
opening.
Chair. I know it's early. Thank you, Honourable Chair and Honourable Committee members. Thank you for your time and attention. Chair, if you would allow me, I'd also like to just acknowledge the Committee Secretary, Mr. Wickham, as well as the Committee Coordinator, Mr. Borges Apanya. I saw that they were busy until quite early this morning, still preparing for this. Your work and dedication doesn't go unnoticed. Thank you so much for your support. My name is Carmen van Niekerk. I'm representing Heineken Beverages today. I have met you before. I'm making representations on the rates bill. As you may know, Heineken Beverage is the only multi-category player in South Africa. And apart from our flagship brand, Heineken, we are also the proud producers of many flagship brands, iconic brands such as Amarula, Savannah, Windhoek Lager, and Nederburg. And we are also the proud producers of a range of very popular non-alcoholic beverages that you see to your right. All right, before I continue with the technical part, I just thought it would be important to reflect where we are and where we find ourselves, as that is important for the policymaking process and the relevance and the context of my comments to follow. You may recall, Honourable Chair, that the last time we met was in May, following the final budget speech by the Minister. At that time, we had expressed our concern around the ongoing above-inflation excise increases. At the time, the final increase was at 6.75% for all alcohol categories. This was in light of the fact that November last year, Treasury had published a paper for commentary to review the excise policy, and commentary by stakeholders, including ourselves, had been made in February. So by the time we met in May, following the excise increase, we were concerned about the basis that informed the decision by the Minister, as the excise policy had not been finalised, nor was the future of the past policy still relevant. Unfortunately, since then, we find ourselves now in October. We have no further certainty. We have not yet been engaged by Treasury for the consultations. And furthermore, this leaves us in the precarious positions that as we now start the planning or finalise our planning for our next financial year, we still have no certainty of the principles that inform the announcement that will be made by the Minister in February. Excise for most or all manufacturers is the single largest expense item, and not having certainty around what that expense item might amount to as we near our new financial year is quite concerning. I'm sure you'll appreciate that. Having said that, I have to acknowledge that we understand that the Treasury colleagues have been under excessive pressure with a lot of unplanned activities, and we do acknowledge that with the G20, the delay in the budget, and the ongoing global and local trade volatility. Having said that, though, we really do impress upon Treasury through you, Chair, that we do require consultation and engagement and certainty around when that will take place and the process that will follow. We've asked this numerous times, and Honourable Chair, I know you've also impressed on Treasury to engage with the industry more transparently. I would honourably request you, with respect, to please impress on Treasury again the importance of these ongoing engagements. And I just realised I didn't put my timer on. I'm going to do that right now, knowing that I've already got a few minutes gone. All right. So excise increases, our ask as Heineken Beverages is that excise increases should be capped at inflation. I'm going to provide in my following slides our support for this ask. Our main one is that in the current environment, above inflation excise increases is increasing the gap between the legal alcohol and illegal alcohol. Our consumers are under enormous economic pressure, and we have seen an alarming increase in the incidence of illicit trade. When we increase the prices of legal alcohol, consumers tend to then buy illicit alternatives, which are becoming more and more available. In addition, the latest WHO Global Status Report has shown that South Africa has made significant positive progress since 2010 in reducing alcohol harm in South Africa. A lot of work remains to be done here, and we continue and are committed to doing that as Heineken and as an industry. Furthermore, very interestingly, is that the legal alcohol market is not growing at extensive rates. In fact, growth is quite keeping pace with population growth. The WHO has in fact estimated that the legal alcohol consumption is lower. It was lower in 2024 than it was 10 years ago. However, contrary to the growth in the flat growth in the legal alcohol market, the illicit market has been growing consistently. This is alarming on many fronts. The WHO has estimated that in 2019, illicit alcohol was the second largest category of consumption in South Africa. We also know from research that has been undertaken by Euromonitor that this has grown extensively since 2019. So tackling illicit alcohol is not just important for the fiscus. This is also under the UN, part of the SDG goals. The UN has acknowledged the threat of illicit trade and the fact that it undermines the efforts to reduce poverty, inequality, and achieve economic growth. In the South African context, we do contend that this is even a larger priority for us. In conclusion and in summary, Heineken Beverages would like to submit that all regulators, including Treasury, should shift its focus to tackling the illicit market in order to reduce harmful consumption and increase revenue collections. Policy decisions need to support the work that SARS is doing as an agency of government, as well as SAPS. Their enforcement efforts will be diluted if excise continues to increase above inflation. In summary, the recorded alcohol has already been appropriately regulated and taxed. As I said, the per capita consumption has reduced over the last decade. The WHO harm indicators have shown positive improvements. The nominal excise revenue, as SARS will attest, are declining. All categories have reached or exceeded the current incidence targets. Legal players contribute significant amounts to the fiscus through the various tax streams that it supports. The focus on illicit is therefore a win-win for regulators and society as a whole. We believe that tackling unrecorded alcohol through policy decisions such as excise will provide revenue opportunities as well as reduce harm. Euromonitor study conducted last year showed that a staggering 16.5 billion rand has been lost due to illicit trade on alcohol excise alone. We are really concerned that the economic conditions in our country are conducive for further illicit growth. The industry, together with various industry bodies, including CGCSA, the DFSA, are conducting and forming task teams to tackle illicit. We are worried that high levels of poverty and inequality and unemployment will support this growth further. We've got a low growth economic cycle and we have numerous enforcement challenges. We therefore implore Treasury to hear our call and for the Minister as we finalise the excise policy review through robust consultations, that in February the excise announcement is limited to CPI. Thank you, Chair. That concludes my presentation.
Thanks very much, Carmen from Heineken. And let's invite, and we have also saved a lot of time. Thanks for that. South African Breweries, over to you, 15 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I will just proceed to share my screen to begin the session. Okay. Apologies for that. Please, can anybody state whether they can see the slide deck that I've shared?
Yes, we can see the slide.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair, to yourselves and the members of the Standing Committee of Finance SAB submits orally, and we have submitted in written format to the public hearings on the draft tax bills, in particular the rates bills. So, Chair, this the inputs that SAB would like to make today, this morning, is essentially to follow up from a discussion in which the Standing Committee has already interrogated the increase on excise in alcohol on the 17th of September this year. In conclusion and in summary, I think there are some key notable points that were made both by the members and yourselves, Chair, in those deliberations. And Treasury had made responses, constructively so, to those discussions. I just highlighted 4 in particular points that were made that SAB would like to reaffirm in our submission to the draft rates bills. What was noted in particular, members questioned the logic of increasing alcohol excise above inflation, warning that this could expand illicit trade and revenue losses. Treasury responded to that point by stating that they note that there needs to be a balance between revenue and the public health objectives. Yourself, Chair, you noted that these unresolved issues need to be included constructively so in an overall discussion that may be continued during the tabling of the medium-term budget policy statement and subsequently receiving a response from Treasury. Members also insisted that because the parliamentary process is important to really honing and shaping tax policy and fiscal policy in general, public participation and effective oversight, including fiscal accountability, is important in passing tax legislation, in particular the excise tax increases. So while National Treasury had stated that the excise adjustment on alcohol was, in their view, and in the argument that was put on the table on that day of deliberation, is aligned with public health and international best practice, there was an acknowledgement about the concerns about fueling illicit trade, and explained that this year's adjustment was essentially and primarily revenue driven. There was also a need, and I think in general we knew of the fiscal environment, to raise additional funds to stabilize debt and sustain the social equity of the excise taxes, and their intention to raise prices as part of the public health objectives of the excise taxes. So I think the question raised during this session, Chair, in particular, is that if both the committee and its deliberations from the 17th of September and the continuation of those deliberations by SAB in the presentation thereof today ask the same question, and then I think we need extensive answers as to why it is not possible, given the nature of the excise tax guideline in the current excise policy where excise should be anchored in inflation, why it cannot be, and why should we accept the volatility thereof, as we've seen historically, and by implication, the lack of credibility in the excise tax adjustment. I think this slide, in terms of just visually showing the interaction between the excise trend over the last 5 years at least, we know as SAB that over the last 11 years, in only 2 instances, has the excise adjustment been in line with inflation. And this goes to show that there has been an almost inclination to be out of policy instead of being in line with the guidelines and the framework. Juxtaposed to this, Chair, is, of course, the illicit trade numbers, which when you understand the interaction, at least in the long term and to some extent in the medium term, you have to ask, is there a correlation in the growth of illicit trade, given that there has been no instance to keep the excise taxes in line with inflation? Going back to the question around public participation, Chair, one of the responses from National Treasury on the 17th of September to the Standing Committee of Finance was that they had put in concerted efforts to adjust its consultation process to allow for continued public participation, noting that they had released the excise policy in November last year as part of this public process, in including participation, to really have workshops and get feedback feedback from the public, the industry, and all vested interested participants to provide inputs to the excise policy draft discussion paper. They also noted in that discussion there were considerable efforts to include both proactive and tax consultative workshop submissions in the process of public participation. But unfortunately and ironically to this, whilst we have made submission to the public participation process of the tabling of the draft discussion paper of the excise policy, there has been no feedback since February 2024 in that regard. And I think closing the loop quite extensively through communication or through a quite transparent process as to when the dates and the actual conversation will begin, I think is important to ensuring that both the oversight and the accountability in that regard does occur. So while there has been an increase in the consultative process in general across the tax legislation, I think in the public policy discussion in particular around the excise policy, there has not been any discussion or noting thereof since the February written submission was made by the industry as well as other interested parties. So not to belabor the points around what has already been responded to by Treasury, I think it's important to add new questions to the discussion as it pertains to the excise increase that is made in the draft rates bill. I have compiled, SCB in particular, rather has compiled 7 questions in this regard, which we would hope to get response on. The first question is to ask National Treasury, what mechanisms are in place to ensure that excise tax increases do not disproportionately affect low-income consumers who may already be burdened by inflation and the current cost of living? That is the policy approach, or has there been an instance to assess whether it has become regressive in nature in its social equity considerations? Secondly, what empirical evidence supports the claim that increased excise taxes will significantly reduce alcohol abuse, rather than simply shifting consumption patterns from the formal to informal markets? I think there needs to be an understanding of whether price increases will lead to healthier outcomes rather than cause a growth in the illicit trade market. Third question is, has Treasury conducted a comprehensive economic impact assessment of how higher excise tax increases will affect employment, small businesses in the broader value chain in the beer industry, i.e. a full assessment of the long-term economic effect of above-inflation excise increases? The fourth question is Treasury open to exploring differentiated excise tax increase that incentivize lower alcohol content rather than applying just a blanket above inflation excise increase? This could serve to better align the industry with the public health goals of National Treasury rather than leaving the industry on the outside and only able to really have to deal with above inflation excise increases. My fifth question is, what is Treasury's response to the concerns that frequent or steep excise increases create uncertainty for business planning and pricing strategies across the beer value chain, and the need for predictability and stability in all spheres of fiscal policy? I think there are many instances in which there are levels and degrees of higher tax certainty within the fiscal policy framework, but very limited and low levels within the excise tax adjustment, which I think needs a comprehensive response. My sixth question is, has Treasury benchmarked its proposed excise increases against international best practices, particularly in economies with similar socioeconomic profiles, such as South Africa? I think the global norms do not mimic increasing excise taxes above inflation, and there is a potential overreaching in the way in which so far the long-term and the medium-term trend, which is above inflation increases in general. Seventh question is to SARS in particular. We used to have a quarterly illicit trade platform in which both SARS, the enforcement from the South African Police Service, and the industry would constructively collaborate to deal with what the trends in illicit trade and the nature and shape thereof. That platform has subsequently not existed for a couple of years. What happened to those constructive and I think regular meetings on illicit trade and the issues thereof that was in collaboration with SARS, the South African Police Service, as well as the industry, in terms of really dealing with illicit trade in a continuous way rather than as a one-stop opportunity that needs to be dealt with holistically. Of course, in all aspects related to excise taxes, we acknowledge as SAB our need to be responsible in all our, I suppose, engagements with the overall alcohol market. And it's important to put that up front, that we have a platform called SAB Sharp, where we consistently try and include ourselves in reducing the negative externality created by the harmful consumption of alcohol. We continue to provide impact assessments annually to both the Standing Committee of Finance and to stakeholders who are interested in seeing us contribute in that regard. And we think it's important that we continue to reinstate this on the conversation around excise taxes. Thanks, Chair. I hope I have been in time. Thanks.
Thank you, Fatzan, also for trying as much as you could to save time. Thanks very much. Let's invite SA Wines. Over
Good morning,
to
Chair, and good morning to all the members of the committees here and also to my colleagues. Before I start going, I just want to check if you can see my presentation.
No, we'll see your face. There's no presentation here.
Okay, the face is the one side. The presentation is important. Maybe someone can assist me from that side. I'm trying here. I'm not sure if I'm doing anything wrong. Let me see if I can share it.
Okay, we can see it now.
I just want to get it in. Chair, so you can see it in presentation mode.
Yes, with lots of bottles of wines here.
Okay, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Right. I think what's important, I can clearly pick up there's an alignment between my previous two colleagues from Heineken and also from SA Brewery. And I think there will also be a link with Salba, Kurt, and the team that will also do a presentation. I was thinking very long and very hard in terms of this presentation. Just listening to the content up until now, it was important for me, and I believe also for the members of the committee, including Treasury, to stand back and say, we have done a similar exercise last year on the 8th of October. Also looking back to the budget, and as you mentioned in the beginning, Chair, this needs to be amended and you need to take it to Cabinet for approval. You will then also recall during January, we've provided submissions on the proposal of a tax policy. You've already heard some of those remarks. Then we made a presentation on the 25th of March. And then due to all the different budget versions, the final presentation was in the week of the 28th of May. So there's nothing more that I can show you. There's nothing more that I can share you on the technical side. There's maybe nothing that I can do to convince you, as the ask is going to stay the same. We're focusing specifically now. As a collective, we talk about all the drinks and the alcohol industry. Important for me is everyone is standing on its own and it's doing something specifically. But as a collective, we viewed as part of the liquor industry. We're guided by the Liquor Products Act as well as the Liquor Act. But when we talk wine this morning, you can see that, let's call it then, a pizza slice of the larger pizza. And during October, and maybe this is a repeat from my two previous colleagues, we were asking and we were saying and we were calling 12 months ago. Please, for all categories, it must be CPI related. And tongue in the cheek, and not trying to be funny, CPI related is not CPI plus 2%. CPI is exactly what it is, CPI. At that stage, I was saying, and I was pleading, say, let's keep the incidence rate as is across all three categories. And then going forward in future, let's align it with the CPI rate of this country, the intent of this government, and where we need to go. If you take the content of all the presentations up until now and all the workshops of the G20 and the B20, everyone is talking about policy certainty. Everyone is talking about the potential of growth, to unleash the potential, to take it forward. And there you will see it in the final line also, the policy certainty. Then we can plan, then we can uproot, then we can replace, then we can replant, then we can go forward, then we can create jobs, then we can take it forward and move as a collective. You will recall this was my opening slide during March and also during May. Although wine, as you see that specific slide there in front of you, maybe we're part of the alcohol industry, tick. But we're also part of agriculture, tick. We're also part of tourism, not only wine tourism, but specifically tourism, that we need visitors to visit our country. People, individuals, they are building careers across the value chain. So when I'm speaking on behalf of wine, I'm not talking about the section that's sitting in the production level. There's also from a production level up to the retail environment, the value chain, from energy, logistics, packaging, etc. It's in there. We 100% understand the social development goals of this country. That's why you will get on each of us. When you sit in a meeting, there will be an ESG risk register. What are we doing in terms of the environment, the social, and what governance do we put in place? I want to leave it there. The next time, when you page through the slides and you read our 6-page submission, I'm not going to repeat it, but we're operating in a capital-intensive environment in terms of investment. It takes 5 years to bear, and when you need to break even, it's anything between 10 and 12 years. It's already highly regulated, and we need to deal with the inflation environment there on the right-hand side. That's why we were saying, specifically March and May, we need to join hands. We need to work together. We need to make sure it's a whole of society approach. That's exactly what's also our plea at each and every World Health Organization. Where there's an opportunity for the private sector to table something, you will pick up that phrase. Also the International Association for Responsible Alcohol Consumption. Also when you start reading all the fine print of the latest United Nations high-level meeting. And we were saying, keep us at that target level of 11, 23, 36 on behalf of the other categories. In green there, in line with CPI, is not above CPI. This was my closing slide during May. We were saying we're in it together, Chair. Although maybe we're standing here this morning, this is a dialogue, it's an engagement. It's not the arm wrestling, it's not a debate. As then there's going to be a winner and a loser. We can differ from one another, but read there in top left hand, this is a partnership. It's not only about policy. We were asking at that stage, reconsider the 6.75%. That was the date. Keep excise aligned with CPI. We demand an evidence-based policy. And then not only acknowledge illicit trade or the illegal industry, we need to do something. We need to do something desperately. So I leave you there with that left hand of my slide. Just from a wine side, you can only follow the yellow sections. For the last 2 years, looking at the volumes of wine, contracting for second year in a row, 2.8% in 2023, and there you can also see the figures from the previous years. That is important. So if fiscus say, listen, I want to see the volumes down, I want to see something that's playing out here in terms of what are you guys doing, that's happening with wine at the moment. I leave it there. If you look at the consumption levels per adult, then at the bottom you will see typical the wine from 2022. The consumption per adult in this country, 10.1 liters, 9.1, 9.5, a downward trend. On the left-hand side, you also see alcohol consumption per adult, another 1.2, 1.2, 1.2, and 1.1. Bottom line, key takeaway of the slide, another downward trend in wine since 2022. I'm not going to repeat, but you will pick up and please read this slide together with the slide from the two previous presenters in terms of illicit. In our environment, we talk about sugar fermented beverages. It's not wine. It's not wine. We're sitting here, numerous arm wrestling engagements with Department of Agriculture and SARS. And lately, we're sitting with a new Liquor Products Act released in March. Now we can clamp down specifically on labeling, specifically indicating what's in the bottle is going to be aligned with what's sitting on the label. It's not the case. If you look at the figures, if you go back to some of my previous presentations, I can't believe that I'm still getting a feedback from government. Sir, we can't support you due to equipment that's not working. How in the world are we going to win this? Every quarter, I do the analysis for so-called products that I believe there's a tax leakage. It costs me 15 to 20,000 rand every 4 or 5 analysis to make sure, is it a grape sugar or is it a cane sugar? And the price cap on the shelves is anything, you can get that between 50 and 60 rand per 5-liter plastic can, typical with a red, a blue, or a green capsule. I'm upset about that and I need action. Don't jump into tax, don't jump into excise. By doing that, then I will go back to all the previous presentations and you will see what is the unintended consequences. That's our plea. Previously, in our technical submission, almost 42 pages. Take your time. It's easy to follow on the right-hand side, that vicious circle. Follow it and make sure, link that to the Euromonitor current outcome. The figures has already been shared with via some of my previous colleagues, and I leave it with you to digest. We would like to believe as wine and brandy industry, we're an extremely important contributor to the fiscus. All that we ask is, let's do it in a way that is at a fair playing field. I'm not going to repeat the numbers, our contribution to the GDP, creating jobs and securing jobs. There you can see the figures. We're not only arm wrestling and battling with inflation across crop protection, electricity, fertilizer, etc., but we're also exporting 40% of our produce. But then we need to deal with tariffs, non-tariff barriers, and you can all recall the latest what's playing out in America. If you want to support us, it's great. Let's look at China, India, Africa. Let's see how we can maybe arm wrestle there, move away from technical barriers. But if you really want to support us as government, please listen today and say maybe, and I can recall in a previous conversation, one of the members of parliament was asking, you're doing all these excellent presentations. Guess what? National Treasury only defend. We're not saying do us a favor. We're not saying, listen, do this or that. We only say, be fair to us. I'm coming into land. We need to acknowledge and say thank you, Operation Vulindlela, in terms of the reform that's taking place in energy, double tick. I'm working on a weekly basis with freight forwarders, exporters. I've been in the port of Cape Town. I've been on any one of those boats that's operating there. I've seen it. It's a huge double tick, a huge moving forward. The media was all over it in terms of what's happening with equipment, planning, etc. The third one for us is maybe corruption and crime in general and red tape in general, focus on illicit crime. And then we're operating in the rural environment, from Uppington, down there in Ladysmith, in between a Worcester, Paarl, or maybe in a Swartland. Local government is critical in terms of support to take this country forward. We want to see a balanced future, but that needs to fuel development. the bottom line there, without taxing out of the industry. I'm going to land, Chair. You will see this in my submission. And normally you ask me for a one-pager, or all of us for a one-pager post this presentation. We're sitting there. We can't endorse the 6.7%. In a very civilized manner, we need to say to you, it's not on. Maybe it's impractical. Maybe it's totally complicated. Maybe this is going to be a first where you will say, listen, we've heard you. And moving forward, from the 1st of November, we will revisit 6.75 and we will do something for the last quarter, the financial year. Keep it at the CPI link adjustments for the new cycle. Keep the specific incidence rates as is. Enforce illicit trade and law enforcement in terms of tax evasion and leakage, specifically when we talk about sugar fermented ales. And whatever you do in terms of standing back, listening to us this morning, building maybe your narratives and say, listen, we need to have a workshop on this. It must be underpinned by a socioeconomic impact assessment. Keep on doing the great work from Project Vulindlela in terms of energy, logistics, and the others. These, Chair and members of the committee, these are not demands. We're saying this in a friendly manner to you this morning. They are really the building blocks of a sustainable partnership, one that can stabilize revenue, we can protect jobs, stimulate investment, and more important, we need the trust between all of us sitting here and working together, and in the end, we need to land something that's going to be sustainable and viable that can take this country forward. That's me. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Much appreciated. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks very much. The next stakeholders, SA Liquor Brand Owners Association.
Good morning, Chair and honourable members of the committee. Let me just share my presentation. Chair, can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to provide our comments on the rates bill. You'll see our submission focuses on the excise rate increases for alcoholic beverages. In the case of SALBA, our focus is on the spirits increase for excise. You'll recall that the increase that was made in the February and then March budget was 6.75%. It was above the CPI during that period. I think in March, according to Stats SA, it was about 2.7%. So this was 4 percentage points above the CPI for that period. Now, Chair, National Treasury in its own document acknowledges that above inflation adjustments have resulted in higher tax incidence across all categories, particularly for spirits. My colleague, Mr. Conradi from the wine sector, talked about the excise incidence rates for the 3 categories. It bears repeating. Wine is at 11%, beer is at 23%, and the spirits category, the average incidence rate is 36%. And yet, Chair, we are above that target of 36%. This provides an opportunity for illicit traders to operate. All these increases the increases above CPI, all it tends to do is it tends to increase the margins of the illicit traders, and they continue to sell products at much cheaper rates than the legal industry are able to do. And this is not a point that is lost on Treasury. Treasury acknowledges that illegal products or legal products are approximately 51% higher across the both on and off trade channels. So this is very disconcerting, Chair, that Treasury, recognizing that we do have a problem with illicit trade and recognizing that legal products cannot compete with illicit products still adds a above inflation adjustment. And we believe that this is just fueling illicit trade. We have cash-strapped consumers who are looking for cheaper alternatives, and unfortunately, these cheaper alternatives happen to be illicit products. Our fiscus is losing out on 16.5 billion rand a year. Ironic in a year when we are talking about the VAT increase that was required to close a gap in our budget. That proposal was not approved. But here's 16.5 billion rand. If we can work together, and SALBA remains a willing partner to address the illicit trade, we work continuously with law enforcement. In fact, tomorrow at our offices in Stellenbosch, we have members of SAPS and SARS at our offices in for training to identify illicit products so that we can jointly tackle this problem. Let me move on to the next slide. What we need, Chair, is policy certainty. Not only in respect of adjustments, we want adjustments to be below CPI. I think especially for spirits, where we've at the highest targeted tax incidence rate of 36% and still above that target. We need some policy certainty. We're sitting in between two policy positions as we currently speak. We still have the 2014 policy, which is the prevailing policy, but the 2024 policy document, which was tabled by Treasury in November last year, part of consultations up until February. And then since then, we haven't heard anything. We have no idea what's going to happen before the next budget announcement. Are we going to be operating on the existing policy, or are we going to be operating on the 2024 policy? And we're reaching the last quarter of the calendar year, but we're also going into the tax cycle for 2026. And with that, we are urgently calling for Treasury to confirm the timelines and for finalization and implementation of the revised policy framework. What are our asks, Chair? Our asks are twofold. We want and we request Treasury to have at or below inflationary increases. Excise burden in South Africa is already high, and as I mentioned earlier, beyond the targeted levels. Further increases only serves to exacerbate that problem. And then, as I mentioned earlier, some policy certainty, and we'd love to to contribute to that consultation process, but we need to understand the timelines. Chair, with that, I will give you a few minutes back.
Thanks very much, Mr. Moore, and for also saving more time. Now is the item for committee members to engage the stakeholders. There are honorable members. You can raise your hands on the platform. Honorable Beasley.
Thank you, Chair, and greetings to my colleagues on the committee, to the presenters, National Treasury, SARS, and everybody else who's on the platform. So, Chair, since Action SA has got into Parliament, we've been very vocal about this particular issue. We believe it's totally nonsensical that we're increasing excise duties above inflation. We believe we're shooting, we're scoring such a massive own goal, and we're just allowing the illegal trade to flourish. And as a result of it, you know, we might be collecting a little bit extra in excise tax, but we're losing so much other in taxes through illegal trade, through pay-as-you-earn, through company tax. So we really, as shooting ourselves in the own foot. So not only are we, whilst we might be getting extra revenue, we're losing a lot more. But on top of that, we're losing jobs. You know, we're bleeding jobs in our country, and people aren't investing in the sector because, as we heard, the excise duties is one of the biggest cost drivers. And yeah, it's just is just nonsensical, Chair. So I really implore our committee, I implore National Treasury, and I implore the Finance Minister to listen to the people in the sector and hear their cries, because it can't carry on like this, Chair, because we're really scoring massive own goals. And I would just like to ask each one of the presenters, we focused on the 16.5 billion that we're losing, but maybe each one of them could actually talk about potential jobs and investments. Because if I was a manufacturer or producer in this market, I would be very wary of investing, upgrading my facilities, if there was no policy uncertainty and we're allowing the illicit market to flourish. So, Chair, yeah, and I know you did raise it in the last meeting that it's something that this committee must look like, but I really think as a finance committee, we must make a line in the sand and say we will not accept any more excise tax above inflation. And in fact, our recommendation should be below inflation, because we're only scoring own goals. And it's actually pointless having public participation if we don't listen to the cries of the industry. So, yeah, Chair, if I could just ask for each presenter just to describe the impact that it is having on investments now and future investments in our country. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Bisley. I'm told that there was amended the agenda and there is supposed to be British BATSA and SICA. I think, Secretariat, can you please be professional? I don't like this. The first thing I call you, you don't pick up my calls. The next thing, you change agendas, you don't inform me in time. I think it's the last time that we appear like this in public. Let's allow, sorry, Mr. Bisley, for that. Let's allow the two to present so that we can make comprehensive inputs as honorable members. Sorry for the inconvenience. BATSA, then SICA. 15 minutes each.
Thank you, Chair. Are you able to see my presentation?
Yes.
Fantastic. Honourable Chair, honourable members, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present today and to engage in this important dialogue. My name is Dane Moyers. I am the Head of Fiscal Affairs for Sub-Saharan Africa at BAT. Firstly, also allow me to commend the National Treasury for the decision to allocate additional budgetary resource to the South African Revenue Service. If these resources are utilized effectively, they'll significantly strengthen government's efforts to combat the pervasive challenge of illicit trade in South Africa. That said, as BAT, we urge that further funding be considered to ensure that SARS is fully capacitated to address the scourge in illicit trade, and to allow SARS to have comprehensive and sustainable enforcement in the space into the future. Furthermore, honourable members, it's crucial to ensure that this additional budget allocation to SARS is carefully monitored to ensure the maximum level of impact. In particular, interventions in the tobacco space have the potential to generate the greatest return on every rand allocated. Now, despite the moderate 4.75% excise increase on cigarettes in 2025-2026, illicit trade continues to decimate the legal market, diverting money away from government. So in the cigarette market, illicit trade is now up to 75% of the market, and this alone is costing the government up to 30 billion rand per annum. Again, 30 billion rand per annum. And as mentioned by previous colleagues, given what played out with the potential VAT increase, 30 billion rand coming back to the fiscus would completely change the taxing landscape in South Africa. Now, what I've put together on the screen is just a graph which takes National Treasury's numbers that they publish on revenue collected in the tobacco space. I then take the excise rate, it's a specific excise system, and I show the volume of cigarettes declared. So going back to 2014, 2015, when there was already an illicit trade problem in the market, roughly 25% of the market back then, declarations to SARS were sitting at roughly 22 billion cigarettes, and the revenue take was 12.6%. Fast forward to 2024, 2025, with an 88% excise increase, declarations to SARS sitting at only 8.31 billion, 9 billion received, despite that massive excise increase in South Africa. This is in nominal terms. If you had to look at this in real terms, what it's actually showing is year on year, despite the excise increase, the fiscus is receiving less money. So what it shows you is the increase in excise isn't working from an overall consumption perspective. Consumption of cigarettes is on the increase in South Africa due to illicit trade. It's not working from a revenue perspective. Less money is being received. And unfortunately, it's not working from a public health perspective due to the growing consumption in the market driven by the illicit trade. So what I'd also like to show the honorable members is what happened in 2019 when SARS put customs officials in the local facilities, manufacturing facilities in South Africa for a 3-month period. And again, the biggest problem in South Africa isn't smuggling of cigarettes into the country. It's local manufacturers registered with SARS who underdeclare their volume. And how we know this, SARS has come out publicly to say that the local manufacturers are the biggest contributor to the illicit trade problem. And when you look at pricing in the market, you see all the brands from local manufacturers selling under the tax rate on a mass scale. And this has happened for years and years. So when SARS put the customs officials in the factory 2019, 2020, what did it actually do? So 1.1 billion additional cigarettes declared. In monetary terms, this is over R1 billion for customs officials in the factory just counting production to ensure that manufacturers are declaring what they produce. Quite interestingly, as BAT, we know what we pay in excise, so we can see what the other local manufacturers are paying. This intervention by SARS led to the highest excise declaration in the other local manufacturers' history in South Africa. So interventions can work. It's low-hanging fruit. And again, this is why I say that the additional budget allocated to SARS, if it is put in the right place, billions can be generated for the fiscus. Now, some commentators have appeared before this committee and asserted that illicit trade is purely an enforcement issue. It's got nothing to do with excise. It's all about enforcement. And indeed, enforcement does play a critical role. However, the notion that excise policy bears no relation to the problem of illicit trade is with respect, misguided. So this formula is just giving a very simple breakdown of the thought pattern that would go into an illicit trader's mind. And the incentive to enter the illicit market is driven, one, by profitability, and profitability is the money that can be made when you look at duty paid versus non-duty paid products, and duty paid products are obviously influenced by excise that needs to be passed on to the consumer. So excise falls into the blue block there with profitability. The illicit trader will also look at risks, and this is the enforcement point, and basically the probability of them being caught. And then you've obviously got demand and supply factors in the market. So anyone that puts an argument forward to say that excise has nothing to do with the illicit trade problem needs to explain to this committee how that profitability point and the demand and supply factors play into it, because enforcement is only one aspect of the formula that an illicit trader would look at. In addition, some commentators have come to this committee and suggested that if taxes were higher, it's an effective way of reducing consumption. So although this can be true, it requires that higher taxes and prices do not lead consumers into switching to illicit cigarettes. And again, South Africa, up to 75% of the market is illicit. So as the prices increase, the consumer has countless alternatives in the market. Our last read in the market, over 55 different brands to choose from that are selling under the lowest economically viable price. So a lot of alternatives, and this is why we're saying that, hold on, increasing prices by way of excise isn't resulting in the outcomes that government may have intended when upping the excise rate. On top of it, some commentators have also come to this committee saying that if you reduce affordability of duty-paid cigarettes, it's the only way to curb cigarette consumption. But again, this is only effective if there's minimal availability of cheaper illicit alternatives in the market. So what I have done here is just pull together a very simple graph to explain why excise increases aren't helping the situation, what we are currently seeing in the market, and why the legal industry simply cannot compete. And some of the colleagues who have already presented have mentioned the cost of living crisis. If you look at our detailed submission, we have put extensive analysis to support that there is a cost of living crisis in South Africa. But on the right of the graph, I'm showing the cheapest legal product. And this is a loss leader being seen in the legal market. Very small percentages being observed. And that is selling at 35 Rand for a box of 20. Okay, the tax rate, so excise and VAT, and this is the minimum collectible tax on a box of cigarettes, is 26 Rand 22. So before any legal manufacturer can sell a box in South Africa, so manufacturers need to produce and pay the excise up front, importers need to import and pay the excise and VAT up front as well. Our bill to SARS at a minimum is 26 Rand 22. Yet the local manufacturers in South Africa, and this is based on Ipsos research, selling a box of 20 cigarettes for 5 Rand a pack, 10 Rand a pack, 20 Rand a pack. So the legal industry simply cannot compete where our bill to SARS is 26 Rand 22 at a minimum, and the duty non-paid market is selling boxes at 5 Rand. So the consumer is also constrained. If they've got a choice, and now these brands are well established in South Africa, between a well established brand selling at 5 Rand or a brand selling at 35 Rand plus, the consumer is now opting for the 5 Rand. So on the back of this, we can see our excise increases, because excise will be passed on to the consumer, will compound the issue, which I'm illustrating on the screen. So what can be done? Very simply, I think continue with providing additional resource to SARS. It's important to allow SARS to enforce. It can allow for forensic auditors. The money that was allocated, unfortunately, is a drop in the ocean. If more money could be allocated, this could build up the revenue service. And if the money is then put onto the right industries, it could have a very positive impact for the fiscus. On top of it, at least in the tobacco space, we are supportive as BAT as a minimum for a minimum retail price to be introduced in the market. I've shown the figures on what the minimum collectible tax is, 26 Rand 22, but there's also production costs, transport costs, retailer margin, manufacturing margin. In South Africa, there's an issue with enforcement based on the selling price, and introduction of a minimum retail price would have a very positive impact, in our view, on the enforcement side. as well as allowing consumers to have better visibility on what is duty paid and not duty paid in the market. On top of it, monitor production. So we currently have production counter rules in South Africa. However, this is a trust-based reporting system where manufacturers need to report their number to SARS. SARS can then come validated on the production counters. This has only happened in 4 years on a handful of occasions where SARS has come and validated the production counters, at least in our facility. So we are advocating for tamper-proof production counters that feed the numbers into SARS monthly, so SARS can compare this to the excise account, and link to that a track and trace system in South Africa would be helpful. And then, given on what I've shown in the cigarette space, I think a freeze on cigarette excise would help the situation in that it would diminish the gap between duty paid and non-duty paid cigarettes, and again afford the legal industry the opportunity to try and compete. Now, this is quite a technical and complex matter that I need to bring up, and I'm going to do my best to pitch it at a high level so the committee can really understand it. But this is on the back of the budget speech where the Honourable Minister said that excise will be announced on budget day, but in future years it will only be adjusted on 1 April. Now, it was also noted in the budget speech that in the cigarette space, we have what is called anti-forestalling rules. So this prevents people from releasing products into the market at the old excise rate once the excise has been increased. And in the budget speech, it was stated that the legislation may be extended. Now, the issue we've got, and if I just take it to some simple concepts, we have in the tobacco industry what we call a control period. So this is a period that runs from 1 December to budget day, or the latest amendment, given what happened with the budget this year, was budget day and 90 days back would be your control period. And there's a formulaic approach which basically says in that control period, we are only allowed to release a certain amount of cigarettes into the market based on prior production. Okay, so the control period is quite important to us as legal manufacturers because we are limited in what we can release into the market. So the issue with this delayed increase or delayed date in the increase of excise, one, it creates an absurdity in law, because if you look at how the law is written, the law is currently written to say when excise increases on budget day. On top of it, with the latest changes that went through due to the current difficulties we had this year with the budget, there's now a retrospective application of the control period. So as a business, it's no longer possible for us to adequately plan if the budget moves. And this would compound the difficulties for us. Initially, there was a clear nexus between the formula for your allowable quantity and that has been broken or will be broken with this potential change. And then, very concerningly for us as an industry, if you say to the consumer, it's budget day, as an example, we're upping cigarettes by excise on cigarettes by 5%, the consumer is going to stockpile because they know excise is going to increase a month later. So demand will increase, but we will be limited to supply that demand due to these anti-forestalling rules. So what will happen, it will create a gap between supply and demand. And what we saw during the prohibition, this is going to be filled by the illicit market who won't be complying with these anti-forestalling rules. So quite important for us that we get to the bottom of this. And our recommendation, especially given that the primary legislation in South Africa prevents the commissioner from extending the control period for longer than 3 months, is that we do not apply this effective date change to tobacco products, because it's just going to worsen the illicit trade situation in South Africa. So quite a mouthful. Apologies. If there are any questions around this, I'd be happy to go through the technicalities. And then second last slide, vaping excise. We're already seeing that it's causing illicit trade. So when the vaping excise first came in, we commissioned studies. There were also independent studies that said the introductory rate was excessively high in the South African context. Last year in this committee, we had commentators coming and saying they were already starting to observe illicit trade in the vaping market. We've also seen loopholes now being closed by SARS with people using classification rules to bring products in and evade the excise. So from our view, the excise on vaping products shouldn't be pushed even higher, because we're going to land up with another alcohol situation with illicit trade, cigarette situation with illicit trade, because it is driving people who want to make a profit from the excise differential that is placed on the products. On top of it, the excise is completely ignoring the concept of tobacco harm reduction, and in a nutshell, this concept is basically saying that the issue with traditional cigarettes is the combustion. If there are alternative products in the market, adult smokers will move to those alternative products, and overall harm in the market will therefore reduce, because on the balance of evidence, when compared to traditional cigarettes, these new category products are less harmful than the traditional cigarettes. So our view on the vaping excise is the excise shouldn't be increased substantially. It should increase in line with inflation. And then just once again, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to the honourable members for their time and consideration. And yes, I touched on quite a technical bit with anti-forestalling, so I look forward to addressing any questions or clarifications that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. You have gone beyond by 3 minutes. Saika.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning to honourable members. Good morning to our colleagues from National Treasury and SARS. Chair, I hope to make up some of the time. Just trying to get access to share. Chair, we'll start off, and we only have 2 matters to discuss this morning. So again, thank you to the relevant members of the committee. Chair, I think importantly is when we discuss this morning, we do so in obviously our capacity not just to ask things from Parliament, but rather to engage on the basis of trying to add to the discussion within the committee on this. And the first point that we would want to do so and support Parliament in its discussions and debates on the relevant bill is regarding rates and threshold adjustments. So this is something we've made numerous submissions on. Honourable members, we did so also in the recent Annexure C process to National Treasury. And we, in fact, understand and have sympathy with the position of the Minister and National Treasury as to their response that thresholds are, in fact, a affordability problem. But I think what we have as a challenge is that not everything can be tainted by the brush of affordability. And I think that is because certain thresholds or brackets, etc., aren't just there for primarily to collect taxes. Some of them, for example, are there to simplify tax administration. Some of them are for macroeconomic policy implementation or for intended relief. And I think that's where our challenge is, that by tainting this all as an affordability, we're not having the discussion as to which of these rates are in fact primarily for other purposes than collecting revenue, and that they are in fact then impacting on policy to a large extent. So I'll give two examples just to make the point. One is regarding small business. So we have within the tax a small business corporation with lower rates, etc., and that aligns to a large extent to the national or macroeconomic policy from the NDP years already, where we want to encourage small businesses and also make certain things a lot easier for them. We see from this list that for example, the threshold to determine what a small business is was last adjusted in 2013, set at 20 million. To put that into perspective, for the national small enterprise, we see manufacturing enterprises defined as small enterprise already at 50 million. And even in other legislation, we see much higher criteria. So that's a different submission. And we've given a link to our previous submission on this to the Small Business Ministry of the lack of a single definition in government of what a small business is. But over this time, we've seen 78% of inflation, which effectively means that currently, from a policy perspective, if we looked at the actual time value of money, we've reduced what a small business is to essentially, in 2013 terms, to just over 11 million from the initial 20 million, which means we are now excluding a lot of businesses that initially the policy wanted to cover. So again, was this what the macros are? Is the macroeconomic policy regarding creation of small business and the fiscal policy regarding what we're incentivizing aligned in this aspect? The second is something called primary residence. This was last adjusted in 2012, and when it was adjusted from 1.5 to 2 million rand, the then Minister of Finance, the late Pravin Gordhan, noted that this was essentially to provide relief to the middle class. That was his statement. And essentially what this exclusion is to make sure that we aren't adding to the cost of the primary residence, or the primary place where people stay, to a certain level of taxpayers, so that the tax isn't a part of the cost, so it doesn't drive up prices. And if we look at just the inflation over this period, since it was adjusted in 2012, essentially we've again halved this rate to 2012 values to about 1 million rand. So again, adjusting as to who we believe we should not be influencing pricing of in the market. And I think it is something that the committee should be looking at in consultation with National Treasury as to which are the rates and thresholds that in fact are primarily to collect monies, and which are the ones that are not, and understand why they have not been adjusted. And what is the underpinning policy from both the fiscal and the macroeconomic policy perspective as to why certain thresholds were not adjusted, where their primary function is not the collection of revenue. Chair, then on to one of the matters that came up in budget this year on numerous occasions. And again, we've raised concerns about the minister's powers to set rates. There's been submissions from SAICA in 2016, 18, and 2025. And we saw the initiation of a court case on this matter as well. There was a settlement, but we do know that what the minister's position is. It was from his affidavit, that from his legal advice, that he believes those powers are in fact only temporarily and therefore are not primary legislative powers. But the matter was never settled legally. It was merely settled politically. And that then begs the question, is Parliament still, or does it still harbor concerns that it has given the minister primary powers? And Parliament has, in the previous standing committee, has acknowledged that many of these rates adjustments, the egg cannot be, or the tax rate egg cannot be unscrambled once it's there, so it cannot undo it, which makes it permanent. It doesn't make it temporary. But I think the concern is rather looking forward. So there's an opportunity in this legislative cycle to see whether Parliament is still in agreement with what it had passed at that point in time. Secondly, what we don't want is this principle, because at some point in time, as noted in Budget 2025, we may need to raise taxes if the economy does not grow again. And I think at that point in time, what we do not want to see again is litigation as to these tax rates, etc., and that we do not disrupt the budget process through such things. Matter then in closing, Chair, if we then are looking at some of these bills which are constitutional questions, there are others and they are contained in our submission for tomorrow's session rather, but there are other tax administrative matters that probably also need some scrutiny and review from a constitutional, as reflected in some of the jurisprudence coming out in the last 14 or so years since the Tax Administration Act has been. Chair, from my side, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you also for sticking to the allocated time and even using much lesser time than allocated. Honorable Beasley, you had asked a general question to all the stakeholders, and sorry for calling you only to find there were still the other two presenters. I'm not sure if you still want to ask another question before I take Honorable back.
No, thank you, Chair, and apology accepted. I know these things do happen. So I think that my question that I asked to the presenters would obviously also go to the British American Tobacco, just the policy uncertainty and the increase in excise tax above inflation and the growth in illicit trade, what impacts it's having on the current and future investments in our country, bearing in mind that we are suffering huge job losses at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Beasley. Honorable Beck, are you there before I take Honorable Squad and Honorable Van Rooyen? You have raised your hand before.
I'm here, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity, and to the presenters. I must start off by saying that I largely agree with a lot of the submissions made today as it relates to policy certainty and the ability, especially for capital-intensive industries in this space, to keep investing. There are, however, some of the presenters here that, I mean, we always welcome public participation, but it's perhaps just worth pointing out that there's a degree of skepticism attached with some of these presenters. Maybe let me start with one of the last presenters first, which is BAT. Now, I share the views voiced around the harms of illicit trade, and I'm concerned in this case around the past tactics of BAT and whether they persist. I'll give you an example, Chair. A few years ago, there were claims published in Amabungane that BAT, as part of its place on the illicit tobacco task team, had access to structures inside state intelligence. We understand there was a call sent by various people in US Congress calling for an investigation into BAT regarding systematic bribery of politicians and policymakers across Central and East Africa. So you might say, Chair, there's a lot of smoke. Is there still a structure that includes BAT and the government targeting illicit trade? And I'd like to understand from BAT, how do the investigations published by reputable outlets affect their legitimacy to talk about illicit trade in the way that they have done today? The second set of questions relates to the presentation from Heineken. I understand that that business has faced some difficulties in years leading up to where we are now, including in 2023. But it's my understanding that they turned a massive profit in 2024. And in fact, a fifth of their shareholding from Johan Rupert's Remgro was able to increase its dividend yield significantly, in large part because of the more than 400 million rand added to Remgro's bottom line because of Heineken's profit. And so if it's true that Heineken is coining it at the moment, it seems a bit disingenuous to talk in the way that we have here about taxes. So I'd just like to understand from the representative from Heineken whether it seems to her at all dissonant or counterintuitive to talk about making sure that the business isn't taxed excessively, when in fact that business seems to be doing very well. That's it from my side, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Squatte. Honorable Squatte, are you there?
Yes, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Let me start off by thanking the stakeholders for the presentations made, which I think they are mostly, almost related in terms of how they feel that we should deal with the issues of illicit trade, but also in terms of the CPI. Now, my questions would be general questions to almost all of them, Chair. The first one is what concession can the industry make to compensate for the above inflation excise increase to be kept within the consumer price inflation? And secondly, Chair, it's what measures is the industry taking to contribute to creating public awareness on the proliferation of illicit alcohol, and how is the industry taking measures to enable consumers to distinguish between illicit and legal alcohol? Because what the most dangerous thing is that the illicit is actually penetrating even in the legal, outlets. So, which has become very much dangerous. The third one, Chair, would be what enforcement strategy do the industry players recommend for government to reduce illicit alcohol, as the price of illicit goods will always be cheaper than the legal goods? As they've already explained, Chair, that the more the price of the legal goods go up, the more the illicit stay lower and become even more attractive to consumers. The last is, do the industry players believe that a lower CPI excise increase will lead to the reduction of illicit alcohol? And what the basis would substantiate this, as illicit providers can actually further lower their cost when the spirits of whether the spirits or other alcohol products? And the last but one is, what is the consumer profile of persons who purchase alcohol that is illicit? And what would be the quantification of possible job losses in the sector in the long term? And the industry players are they having any diversification strategy to be able to deal with that? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Honorable Van Rooyen, then Makuela.
Thank you very much, Chairperson Dr. Msonganyi, and very good morning to all on the platform. Allow me, Chair, to start by acknowledging the presentations as made by various participants on behalf of their respective sectors during these public hearings. Chair, my first question will be on, I think it's SAICA. It made a very sharp and very what you call concerning recommendation. I just want them to unpack it, give details to the committee, because I think these are the expectations on what the committee should do. The recommendation says that as MPs, we must take full advantage of the legislative cycle as we deal with tax, what you call tax laws or maybe tax bills, as compared to the current status quo, where we appear to have outsourced that responsibility to the executive. I just want them to unpack this thing clear to the committee, because at some stage there was an insistence that the committee seems not to be taking full advantage of the provisions of the Money Bills, what you call Act, more especially in terms of processing and finalizing tax rates. So if they can just shed some more information, what do they expect us to do differently as COF when we deal with this process? Because I think it's coming out very, very sharply from their recommendation. Then secondly, Chair, Mepanda said something very interesting, that at some stage, there was a platform, a multi-sectoral platform that was created to deal with issues of illicit trade, and it generated certain recommendations, but also it appeared to have been somehow making some inroads in dealing with the illicit trade problem. But that was stopped. My question is, who was convening this, and when last did it sit? Because truly speaking, it doesn't make sense to me if it was working to deal with illicit trade. Is the enemy of economic growth. Illicit trade is an enemy of addressing our developmental goals. So it's important that we should treat illicit trade as the enemy of our agenda as the government of the day. So it becomes interesting as to why do we stop platforms that are yielding results in terms of dealing with illicit trade. So if Ms. Banda can shed some information on those two questions, so as we follow up, we are able to know exactly whom to talk to. And thirdly, Chair, as COF, in our recent discussions about visiting foreign countries or the so-called study tours, we highlighted the need to be guided by what are the current problems that we need to resolve in our country, and that other countries seems to be having better solutions, the so-called best practice model. And illicit trading is one of those that have been highlighted as something that should be considered by the committee when making a determination of which countries to learn from, So it's clear that the stakeholders who made presentations in these public hearings today seems to be more exposed to some of these best practices. So I'll request any one of them just to indicate which country do they think as South Africa we need to learn from on dealing with this matter of illicit trade. And there was a very interesting suggestion on us being urged to call for consideration of a minimum retail price as one of the best practices in dealing with illicit trade. You see, it will be important for us to know which countries among those who are exhibiting best practice models can we learn from, more especially around things like the execution of the minimum retail price as part of dealing with the illicit trade problem, but also other positive trends that we can learn from those countries about managing this problem of the illicit trade. I think that advice will help us to make a proper determination as committee to say which countries can we learn from. And I think majority of the stakeholders who made a presentation today here do have information about those countries that are handling this problem quite appropriately. And Chair, maybe lastly from my side, it's very concerning to hear a statement like we did the same presentation last year and we seems not to be registering progress coming from our public hearings or maybe from the public. It's very concerning also to hear that there are certain expectations that committee seems not to be meeting in as far as participants in the public hearings are concerned. You know, it's concerning to hear that National Treasury couldn't give feedback to submissions made on access policy by various stakeholders. It is concerning, Chair, because our constitutional democracy, among other things, it's anchored on the principle of public participation. You know, so if our public participation models seems not to be obviously effective, we should all be concerned as public representatives. You know, and I think we need to take a very, very serious discussion, Chair, at some stage as a committee. And that discussion, one of the documents that we must also consider as we deal with that discussion as a committee, is this social economic impact assessment. I think National Treasury should by now be having that particular assessment as to what is the impact of this, the changes that they are planning. What will be the impact of these two issues of our developmental goals or our developmental priorities, unemployment, job creation, poverty, and all those things, you know? So it's important at some stage we need to create special time, because we are hearing this thing correctly, so as said by presenters, not for the first time. And we seem not to be making any progress in terms of accommodating some of the valid points that they are raising. So I think at some stages of committee, we really need to take a very, a robust discussion around dealing with these particular policy processes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Honorable Fondrain. Honorable Makuben.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning to yourself, Honorable Chairperson, Dr. Maswanganyi, and my fellow honorable members, my colleagues. Honorable Chair, I have these few questions. First question is to the industry players who have made presentations before this standing committee this morning. Can I get an understanding where they think that the draft amendment hinders investment towards job creation or economic growth, especially in their key sectors? Where can they point to us where they believe that this draft bill hinders investment, especially in their key sectors? And then my second question is to National Treasury and SARS in terms of them indicating to us where they believe that the draft bill increases fairness for small businesses growth and for improved tax administration towards greater compliance. And then the last question, Chairperson, I would want to find out what are the measures that are incorporated in the draft bill that ensures that there are greater administrative, seamless administration that would reduce the burden for smaller and unorganized businesses that will gear towards maintaining integrity and towards ensuring that the tax system has less burden for smaller taxpayers, businesses. Where is the draft amendment actually indicating to lessen the tax burden in the system? That would be my question, Chair, because I think the lesser the tax burden, it would encourage more taxpayers, and it would also discourage those that would just not want to visit or want to pay taxes because the tax system is cumbersome. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Makubele. I think those were the questions from the members. Let's go back to the first stakeholder, Heineken. Over to you. Please respond to the questions that are relevant.
Thank you, Honourable Chair and Honourable Members. Thank you for the engagement. We appreciate it. I think there were quite a number of questions relating to illicit alcohol that may warrant a more in-depth engagement. And in actual fact, the DFSA, which is the Drink Federation South Africa, it's the overarching trade association that represents all the categories. And they are charged with the mandate of doing research around illicit alcohol, which they did do, which finished last year or this year on the 2024 year with Euromonitor. And we had actually asked them to be at this committee. We know the interest in the illicit alcohol, but due to the health of Dr. Jamal Ramasan, he's unfortunately undergoing cancer treatment and he wasn't able to be here. Chair, through you, I wanted to know whether it would be possible for us to arrange some kind of briefing session with the DFSA so they can unpack the multiple questions that have been asked around the illicit over and above the answers that we can provide today. I would be happy to discuss that with you and see if we can arrange that with the committee so we can go through that. I think maybe I'll take a stab at some of the questions just broadly. Just in terms of what type of consumers buy illicit alcohol, it is across the board. I think it is safe to say that people who are more pressed, to turn their buck every month, maybe fall victim to it more easily. But unfortunately, illicit alcohol, is so pervasive that even high-value brands are being counterfeited. So even high LSM consumers may unknowingly be purchasing illicit. Part of the research that was done actually shows that 67% of consumers who do purchase illicit alcohol, so they've admitted they've bought it, they don't actually care where it comes from because it is cheaper for them. So there are some concerning trends, and I think it is, unfortunately, as I said, something across the board. Honourable van Rooyen, I know you also asked countries to learn from. I think countries have very different socio-economic landscapes, and therefore it has been difficult to pinpoint a country. We know that anything introduced that further places a burden on the legal industry without being properly enforced on the informal or illicit market, further widens the gap through any type of regulation. And in countries, even where enforcement is better, where regulations like minimum resale pricing or minimum unit pricing is implemented, it hasn't had the desired outcomes. And there is research we can also share with you to show that. Honourable Burke, I will get to your question specifically. I'm just wanting to look at the other ones. In terms of jobs, my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong. In the alcohol industry, I don't think we've yet quantified jobs around illicit. We have focused on the fiscal loss, as well as other impacts that it's had on the industry. It's something that I think at the moment, the value chain of the legal alcohol industry is largely absorbing a lot of these costs. And I think this cannot, as you had said, quite rightly, Honourable Beasley, that this is not something that is sustainable. Again, as we unpack the research that has been done by the DFSA, we can share more of that. And further research is continuing also through the support of the CGCSA across various sectors. Honourable Burke, I come to your question. We are unfortunately in a closed period from the 1st of October until the 22nd of October, which is tomorrow. I unfortunately am not able to answer your question directly in relation to the profitability. I would make the undertaking that I will have a letter on your desk, also shared with the rest of the committee members by Thursday, as soon as our closing period is over. Actually putting into context your question around the profitability relative to our excise bill, I think that would be quite informative. If you would allow me that, I'm sorry that I cannot answer you directly on this platform. I think going through my notes, I hope I've covered everything. I will allow my colleagues to come in as well, if that's okay with you. Thanks, Honourable Chair.
Okay, thank you. Heineken, SAB.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the members for the considerable amount of questions. I will try and answer as many as possible without taking up too much time. I think if it's possible to the committee secretaries, I'd like to share a slide that we have put together as SAB with regards to our investments, if it's possible. Do I have sharing ability? If the committee chairs can let me know.
Yes, you do, Fatsan.
Okay, thank you for confirming. Let me just see if I can do that in due time. Okay, just 2 seconds. This is in addressing, in particular, Honourable Beasley's question around the question around the investments impact of the increase in excise. Now, as you already know, it's not sharing. Let me see if I can do it one more time. If not, I'll just speak to it in that sense. Oh, there it is. Okay. So just, Chair, I think it's important to note that SAB is a 95% localized business. In that regard, we do have 7 breweries across the country, and because of that, we're very CapEx heavy. That CapEx doesn't only include just building a new brewery. It does include essentially also extending and maintaining breweries. It requires keeping them afloat, as well as the people that actually work in them. And since 2022, up until 2025 at least, we have been heavily committed to increasing and maintaining CapEx. In particular, during 2022 and 2023, we continued to make large investments to increasing our existing breweries in the Eastern Cape and in the KZN. We also have done our share of one of our biggest suppliers of glass, ensuring that the Black industrialist that was quite heavily involved in putting that entrepreneurship idea on the table, that we backed them comprehensively in terms of investments. That to date contributed, based on our economic multipliers, around 7.3 billion to GDP, and around across the both indirect, direct, and induced jobs from these CapEx investments, around an estimated 40,000 jobs. So because of that, I think in the conversation related to excise taxes, it's important to note that if we aren't able to get, at least in the medium term, some sense of excise tax certainty, it does affect and is quite disruptive to thinking around maintaining, growing, and ensuring our CapEx breweries, our CapEx in particular, our breweries rather, stay afloat. We do intend on increasing our ability to increase our manufacturing ability, and our planned CapEx project is to see an expansion in Gauteng as well as in the KZN province. That would amount to 4.2 billion rand for 2025, but that is very much cognizant of the tax environment. It continues to be unknown to us as to what that may look like, Chair, as well as to Honourable Alan Beasley, around if we really can provide our own finances the room to really put this into, make the wheels turn in this regard, because we do really need the tax environment to be enabling to allow us to really start putting things in place to ensure CapEx growth does occur from our side. So in terms of investment, We're very much committed to it. We've always been, even through quite resilient and tough economic times. In particular, 2022, we had hyperinflation, quite high inflation in that regard, but still insisted that we needed to keep our breweries afloat. And we, even in 2025, we do think into the medium term that expansion is important, and we do continue to anchor ourselves in that. But as we continue to talk about excise taxes, I think there needs to be a concerted effort into saying if there is a positive commitment to increasing capex, surely there can be at least a concession to say tax certainty as a principle should be on the table and not be disregarded in conversations around economic growth and the multipliers thereof. Chair, there were also questions around the illicit trade. I just want to go to Honourable Van Rooyen's question around the illicit alcohol platform that we used to have quarterly with SARS. I think that was a critical platform, not only to deal with the nuances and details around closing the small gaps with illicit, rather than dealing with the big macro gaps, which is funding SARS on enforcement and funding the SAPS by creating syndicates and task teams that can actually deal with it as experts and not as another form of crime element that needs to be dealt with. I think there have been, that platform in particular allowed us to say, look, SARS, there are some technical gaps in the loopholes of the excise tax environment that can be closed through discussion that we note and we think you have the ability to close. I think though that platform, the last time we had spoken to it and seen a constructive effort to ensure that it continues to exist was in 2023 and largely in 2022. And since then, I think we haven't minuted any real ability to continue those conversations without making it a national issue. I think there was a constructive way to make it an industry and a collaborative matter with government that we can deal with in a constructive way by making inputs quarterly and not just making inputs to the draft tax bills. There was a very technical question about how lower CPI excise increases or at inflation excise increases would, on that basis, improve the tax environment and would be substantially better than the current format that we have around above inflation increases. I think there is an economic discussion around how market distortionary above inflation excise increases can be. And I'm hoping on a technical front, maybe some of the tax team from National Treasury can also, and the economic policy team can really give us a sense of if they don't see diminishing marginal returns from excise increases, and some of the trends where the increase in excise taxes above inflation also create a greater negative externality around creating incentives for manufacturers not to tax evade, essentially, because one, they see that excise taxes are so high. So the long-term trend is obviously to say, well, why would I want to pay excise taxes if I can just, capitalize on the price differential and essentially create a syndicate of sorts that can bypass the very large and a little bit highly regulated in terms of excise taxes without really pulling back. So I think there is an incentivization element that creates large market distortionary effects that honestly incentivizes manufacturers to not look at manufacturing legally. I think there's a component to that says, you know what, why are there no incentives to encourage legal manufacturing? And one of that, I think, is a tax enabling environment. And insofar as manufacturers see the high excise taxes, there is no incentive to really internalize and be part of the formal market if there are very large price incentives and high taxes as a barrier to entry to actually being part of the legal market. So there's a market distortionary element that I think needs to be part of the discussion. In terms of quantifying job losses, I think the multiplier effect of not putting the right tax enabling environment insofar as excise taxes is the incentive for increasing the excise tax environment. And I think that's important to note that anything that isn't conducive to allow for manufacturers to stay in the legal market is essentially funding and reducing the job losses or the job impact of the legal environment and increasing the jobs by implication of the illicit market. There was a question around from the last MP that made a comment around where the draft tax bills hinder investment. And I think one of the big important contexts for the excise taxes is it doesn't exist in isolation of the macroeconomic environment, which the budget review document talks about in Chapter 2. And in Chapter 3 or Chapter 4, there's a discussion around the fiscal policy environment. And while we note importantly that the macroeconomic environment in Chapter 2 states that GDP is still quite low, households are still quite constrained, and therefore cannot afford to take on more taxes in any shape or form. There is the economic concept of automatic stabilizers, which means in environments where there are tough economic conditions, there should be a position, at least from the fiscal policy standpoint, of not increasing taxes because the economy is constrained in order to stabilize the economic environment, as well as managing expenditure. And I think the management of expenditure was done well in the fiscal policy context, but in the understanding of the tax environment, the biggest contradiction was that excise taxes were increased in spite of the nature of Chapter 2 of the budget review, which said the macroeconomic environment is indeed muted, but still to insist on taxes being increased is a means of contradicting the idea that we are trying to maintain the current environment while seeking levers in which to increase economic growth. As shown from the slide that I had presented, we are committed to increasing CapEx investment as a manufacturer, and at the same time, when there is a insistence to overlook the macroeconomic environment and the indications thereof that the economic growth is muted, and then to increase taxes, it hinders the ability to invest. So the above inflation increase at 6.75%, 2% above inflation, essentially is in contradiction to where we are in the macroeconomic environment, and also to the insistence that we have made that CapEx investment is important, and to the desire to create a tax-enabling environment, which is to encourage investment and not to reduce it in an environment where investment is needed. I hope I've answered as many questions as possible, but I'll allow our colleagues from the other associations to add on where necessary. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. SA Wines.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to show you one slide, if possible. I haven't prepared it now, but I can send a full presentation for you at a later stage. It's all about specifically when we talk about sugar fermented or ales. Can you see that figure on your slide? I'm just blocking out the brand names. I think what's important here when we talk about illicit, and when you spend some time on a Euromonitor report, you need to understand there's different categories of illicit. From a wine perspective, we would like to focus specifically what's in front of you. You will see that it's typical a plastic can. There you can see the different red and all the caps there. And then you also see on the right-hand side, looking like a bag in a box. Now you will agree with me, that is not the image that we would like to portray in a consumer environment. But guess what? You can buy this in a local store. I want to invite anybody from this committee, or maybe as a group, let's one day go and visit one or two of these shops. Don't call it a mystery shopper. Go in there, buy any one of these products. We can even have ales or a sugar fermented tasting. Then we can drive to an independent lab. We leave it there for 3-4 weeks, and then they will test it. And they will determine the source of the sugar that's fermented in there. And then in my full presentation that I will share with you, I can tell you exactly in terms of what's in there. Typical, that's the machine. That is a private machine. Government is supposed to have these machines. It's supposed to be operating and running. Take my word for it. It's sitting there for more than, let's say at least 2 years. They can't buy these, let's say, plastic bottles to go and analyze it. I've done it from our side. There you can see the different names, and please, this is not for public. I don't want to put up the names here, as I was just trying to illustrate to you. There you can see the alcohol content. You can do the analysis, and you can see what's in there. I will stop there and not taking it further. But what's really important for me, Chair, is just to understand when we talk about illicit and illegal, it's not that difficult to act, and it's not that difficult to ask law enforcement to do something and to support us. So that for me is really the first point. The second one for me, when we talk about investment and when we talk about policy certainty, then we normally think about maybe it's a foreign investor. We need also say, just stand back. If I'm a producer and I'm farming with wine grapes, then you will get anything around about 40% of these producers, it's mixed farming. It can be palm, stone, citrus, table grapes, etc. So if I need to replant and there's no certainty in terms of I know I need to pay VAT, I know I need to pay excise, but if that is not a certain given figure, it's extremely difficult to plan. So guess what? Then I might move to any one of the other industries. That's maybe not 100% what I would like to do in my environment, as I already invested in cellar and in equipment there. The same then applies for your workers. If I can say I replant a specific tree and or I'm going to do vines, then at least I can stretch my permanent workers as well as my seasonal workers. And in the wine industry, when we look at our expenses, if you look at any permanent labor or seasonal labor, then at least you're talking high in the 30%. The other thing that's really important for me is, and when you start reading back to some of my previous submissions, I've mentioned there also national minimum wage. At some states, they were also sitting at CPI plus 6, 7, 8%. Now, last year, at least we're operating about CPI plus 1 or 1.5. So when you talk about illicit, it's also about the quality of jobs. If someone is operating in the formal sector, then we know that individual, he or she is saying, I'm getting at least a national minimum wage. The industry and the majority of employers, they say, I'm striving for a living wage. I will take this individual and I will make sure that he or she is also sitting with disposable income, that he or she can also take it forward. That's why it's important. I want to encourage all the members to read my submission and specifically pay attention to page 2. There's 2 links in there. The one is SAWIPB. It's a South African wine. It's a professional body. We need to make sure that we equip people not only to work on a production unit or a farm or a winery, but also in packaging, in glass, in logistics, in the retail environment. And therefore you need certainty. At the moment we're shrinking in terms of our hectares. So guess what? Then we're also going to shrinking in terms of the workforce. And that, Chair, is really why we would like to see that certainty. They need certainty for everyone that's playing in the chain. And that is what we would like to see. The last comment, not going into the detail, but I think what is important due to circumstances, what not possible. But I think the value add and opening a conversation from the Drinks Federation SA is really not only to build on the Euromonitor survey they've just completed, and you can get the results, you can Google it, you can AI it, you will get all the results out there, but also to engage and to understand what do we mean when we look into the Euromonitor and then we look to the proposed liquor amendment bill. So when you start unpacking illegal drinking age, or you start unpacking marketing, or you start unpacking billboards or whatsoever, at least then it's a conversation, then it's a two-way discussion. And I think that is what we would like to see in addressing all these maybe concerns, and or maybe I need more information to make an informed decision. So that for me is just a couple of remarks that I want to leave with you. If there's anything now or later specifically to wine, I will try to answer. If I need to get more information, I'll gladly do so. But I think I'll stop there, and I think we're building on one another in terms of the alcohol industry providing input in context, never in defensive mode, in context, that you can make an informed decision taking it forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Then let's move to SA Liquor Brand Owners Association.
Thank you, Chair. I will try and respond to some of the questions. I'll take Honourable Beasley and Honourable Makubela's questions around investment. I think from a trade association perspective, investment decisions really take place at a company level. But if we look at the spirits category in particular and the challenge of illicit trade, the adjustment to excise in March took the amount on a litre absolute alcohol to 292 Rand and 91 cents. That translates to 94 Rand 46 cents on a 750 ml bottle of spirits, importantly at a 43% ABV. And some analysis that we did, think about a little over 12 months ago, showed that around about 53% of the retail selling price goes to tax. It's around about 39%. Our target, you'll recall, should be 36%, but we're around about 39% already. And then we still have to add that on top of that. So those are the type of margins that illicit traders are working with in terms of competing with legal businesses. Now, in terms of investments going forward, it's about demand planning, supply and demand. If, as we've seen from the illicit trade report that was done by Drinks Federation of South Africa, if illicit trade over the last 7 years up to 2024 has grown by 55%, that means demand is down. So you'll have to address your supply side. And these are decisions which legal producers have to make. You can't go invest in creating demand for or supply for where there's no demand. So those are the type of things that influence investment decisions going forward. And yes, we believe that an increase above inflation does help to fuel illicit trade. That means the demand for illicit products increases, and it means we would start producing less from a legal perspective. We've mentioned the tax losses for government. And then there was a question regarding does industry believe that a lower CPI will lead to a reduction of illicit? I think it certainly gives us a fair shot at winning back market share. The products which our members produce are safe for consumers. If we can compete on a more even basis, we can help to reduce illicit trade. But I guess we'll probably have to do some empirical studies. I certainly believe that it does give us a better chance. They have producer price inflation that also factors to. But if you're evading up to 53% of a retail selling price in the form of tax, you have got a significant advantage over legal contributors, legal businesses. There's a few questions that Honourable Sekwati raised around measures to create public awareness about illicit trade. From an industry perspective, and SALBA has been very actively engaged for many years now. We started 8 to 9 years ago, first educating our sales reps so that they can identify these products in the market. Over the last 3 years, we've trained in excess of 3,000 law enforcement officers. We've trained SARS, we've trained SAPS, we've trained Border Management Control to help them identify illicit trade so that they could join us in the fight against illicit trade. The DFSA is now starting with a public awareness campaign, and as one of my colleagues said, perhaps we can invite them to share more detail on that program. The The enforcement strategies that will help to reduce illicit trade. I think there are many issues that we've raised, and I think with our detailed submission, we've touched on this. Our detailed submission to Treasury, we've touched on this. Certainly, greater enforcement means that we need to work with law enforcement, but it also needs to lead to harsher punishments. There's been cases of administrative fines for 1,500 Rand that's been issued. These illicit traders pay that fine and happily continue the next day. So there must be a greater concerted effort from the National Prosecuting Authority to recognize this as a priority crime and to start convicting people and putting them behind bars. Administrative fines are not going to act as a deterrent. The work that we've been doing with SEPs to train officers in terms of identifying illicit trade and how and the charges that need to be laid. We now are focusing on working with the National Prosecuting Authority, so the prosecutors can also understand what laws have been broken, what are the maximum penalties. But from a policy perspective, if we could start making punishment a lot harsher. We've been engaging with the National Liquor Authority. We find that there's court cases on the go, but licenses haven't been revoked. So those are the type of things I think which will start helping us win this battle. There was a response in terms of the consumer profile. I won't get into that. Possible job losses, Honorable Sekwati, and long-term diversification strategy. Look, I think in terms of diversification strategy, what tends to happen is if you start diversifying your product base, and there's lots of changes that's been happening in the industry. We have the new Liquor Products Act that was introduced in March. There are some new spirit categories that's been introduced, some as low as 24%, a new flavored category. But we find that as a particular brand grows, and we have 5 or 6 spirit brands which we know are targeted. As soon as a particular brand starts to grow and there's greater consumer demand, we find that illicit traders pivot towards that particular product, and then it becomes another targeted brand which we have to be on the lookout for. So I think the industry is adapting to consumer demands. We were supportive of the liquor product amendments that came out early this year, but we are in the alcohol industry. We've now introduced non-alcoholic products for consumers, but illicit traders target the products that are selling the most, and so diversification will only help you to a certain extent. I just wanted to touch on the issue around the multi-sectoral platform. Yes, I was one of those with Ms. Banda on that forum. I think it was useful to identify technical issues that we could highlight with SARS. There was a similar forum that was established with SAPS. It was called the Counterfeit and Illicit Trade Forum. We spent about 2 years working on a terms of reference. The terms of reference were eventually signed off, but we also haven't had a meeting since, I think, 2023 was the last meeting. So even from a SAPS perspective, which is why we've decided to, instead of working at that national level, to focus on working with at provincial level with and at community level, identifying SEPs and SARS officials who want to be trained, and we've gone out to do some training. That, I think, is all the questions that I have recorded, but I'm happy to respond to additional questions. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, are you available?
I have a problem of connectivity this side. Okay. Now we are going to BAT.
Thank you, Honourable Chair and Honourable Members, for the questions. I'll endeavour to answer all the questions that I captured, but if anything hasn't been answered, please let me know. So to the question from Honourable Beasley around jobs, in 2022, we commissioned as the legal industry through our trade body, we commissioned Oxford Economics to look at the jobs supported by the legal tobacco industry. We actually have a test case in South Africa, given the unconstitutional tobacco ban that took place and the impact that had on illicit trade. So where we are currently at, and I say currently 2022 analysis, was 125,000 jobs supported by the tobacco industry. This is direct, indirect, and induced in the industry. So covering the full spectrum of jobs supported. If we look at the impact that the tobacco ban had, and again, illicit trade flourished after the tobacco ban, 35,900 jobs were lost as a result. So jobs supported lost as a result of the growth in the illicit trade. I think this ties to Honourable Makabela's question around the policies and how these policies could result in things like innovation, foreign direct investment, and I think I've illustrated the link between excise and illicit trade through the diagram that I showed. But I think one thing to add to that is any manufacturing facility would have both fixed and variable costs, and the fixed costs are generally shared across all production. So if you have illicit trade lowering production, your fixed cost is then shared on a lower volume, and this starts making your cost of production a lot higher on products. So if illicit trade grows and it then flows into volumes of a business, this obviously then has a negative impact on decisions around foreign direct investment and obviously jobs in the sector. To Honourable Burke's question, I think on the legitimacy of the research, I did show graphs from National Treasury where I had done the conversion. In our formal submission, I've put all the data that I've used, so fully auditable, to show that the numbers are coming from National Treasury. The Ipsos data that I showed on the pricing, as BATSA, we commission Ipsos to go into the market through a representative amount of retailers and purchase products, and they capture that data. We do not get involved in the process, and the numbers I shared came out of that study, as I mentioned during my presentation. But I would respectfully encourage the honourable members just to go to their closest corner shop and ask for a box of cigarettes, knowing that the minimum collectible tax is 26 Rand 22, and you can see what the products are being sold for, and you can see the brands and where they are produced. So Ipsos just gives an outcome of the state of play in South Africa. I also quoted up to 75% of the market. This isn't a sum thuck. It is based on comprehensive research, follows a very similar methodology to what the academics use, just different data sources, more comprehensive data sources than the academics and universities are using. So I would be more than happy to take the honourable member through our calculation, which supports the contention that illicit trade in cigarettes is up to 75% of the market, and also shows that there has been a consumption increase in the country. On Honourable Van Rooyen's question around country examples, I think the one thing to mention is there's no silver bullet that can deal with the illicit trade issue. And obstacles need to be put in place based on local circumstance, and once the issue is contextualized from the South African perspective, you can then look at best case examples in other countries. So, for instance, I mentioned tamper-proof production counting. In the European Union, on the back of them implementing track and trace legislation, they installed an anti-tamper-proof device which actually counts the codes on boxes of cigarettes. But my understanding is that technology can easily be changed just to count production. So that's one example of a country or at least a union where best-in-class technology is being used. On MRP, there are examples of countries such as Malaysia, Brazil, putting MRP into the health legislation, but this didn't work due to the fact that an MRP, so a minimum retail price, would need to be increased annually with inflation, increased annually with costs, increased as excise increases as well. So being put into a health bill which isn't changing, the minimum retail price just stayed at a level and then didn't have long-term impacts. On top of it, you would want a minimum retail price in a piece of legislation that has an enforcement arm, and we know the health bills don't have an enforcement arm with an enforcement leg tied to it. So you would want something like this in the Customs and Excise Act. But again, the South African enforcement space lacks a position that allows for easy enforcement when you are selling under the tax rate. It's a convoluted process that requires detentions, investigations. There's jurisprudence or case law in South Africa that just shows how long this process takes to actually deal with the illicit trade. So there are examples, but again, they need to fit into the South African context. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Saika.
Thank you, Chair. To Honourable van Rooyen's request to just unpack, I'll try and just do it. These are complex issues. I'll just give the principles. Again, the context of our engagement is to express our concerns and assist Parliament to debate and conclude whether it is comfortable with the laws that it has passed or as it is proposed. This matter was debated by the Fifth Parliament back in 2018 as well, and there are two separate issues. There's a legal issue and a practical issue. From a legal issue, and I think the courts have dealt with this in the last few years in about 5 cases I can recall, is regarding whether Parliament can, through legislation, assign primary legislative powers to the executive. Our view is that the answer is in the negative, and that was our position in 2018 and remains our position. The question then was, is that what is being done when we talk about the minister by announcement determining rates? At that point in time, an additional qualification was added to the provision, namely that Parliament had to ratify it within 12 months, and it was argued that that made the provision temporary and not primary legislative powers because of the ratification. However, Parliament at that point had to concede that when it came to things like transactional taxes like VAT, where it was 12 months after implementation or announcement, that it would be practically impossible to reverse such a change because there would be millions of transactions that would have to be reversed. And therefore, in practice, in practical terms, it was in fact a final determination. So the practical, and this is the same arguments, and I think that was coming up earlier in the year in respect of the litigation as to whether such an announcement, hence our concern that the matter has legally not been resolved and remains unresolved, that there are significant concerns regarding. The other was the practicality. So the then Chair, Honourable Yunus Karim, then said, but what must we do? There is a practical, what must the minister do? In our submission on the same legislation at that point in time, we then looked at some of what some other countries were doing. In some of the parliamentary democracies who have constitutional monarchies as well, Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom, their legislation does also require prospective implementation, but they do have what they refer to as good faith enactment, and there are certain limitations. Canada applies a maximum of 3 months, and the United Kingdom has to table something before the Exchequer within 4 months, though by law it is that they actually has to be prospective. In New Zealand, it also has to be prospective, and when there is a need for an immediate time, the bill is tabled and debated and passed in the House on the date of the announcement. And in the United States, all legislation from a tax perspective has to be prospective. If there is an increase that needs to be done, they'll be passed in or proposed with a resolution of intent in March, and usually then tabled in September later in that year. So we agree that it is not a unique problem to South Africa. However, we are a constitutional democracy, and that is where the legal element, not just the practical element, needs to be considered. And we need to start there. And is Parliament, when it debates, comfortable that it has first crossed the legal hurdle, then thereafter dealing with the practicalities of the timing, taken that the minister's concerns regarding people being able to do things and transactions by announcement, if they understand what the rate changes will be, is a valid concern, but it's still a concern that has to be dealt with within the confines of the current legislative structures. Honourable Van Rooyen, I hope that does unpack and clarify the matter.
Okay. Thank you, honorable members. Those are the responses from stakeholders. Are there follow-up questions? Honorable
One
Dr.
follow-up. Sorry,
Dr.
Chair.
Yeah, over to you, Dr. Beck.
Thank you, Chair. One follow-up question to BAT and the representative then. Let me just say that it's not my intention to place a regulatory engagement officer from the BAT under the spotlight. We still welcome public submission and public engagement, and I would encourage them to, again, in future, make these contributions. But with respect, Chair, the question was entirely avoided. The question was whether, given that organization, BAT's own past in South Africa and on the continent, whether they have the legitimacy to try and make submissions on what's happening in the industry, instead of asking about the legitimacy of the data referenced when they do decide to make a submission. I'll give an example, Chair. In 2021, the BBC had an investigation that found that BAT had paid a bribe to the former president of Zimbabwe. Likewise, Amabungane, as far back as 2014, indicated that BAT was so-called in bed with South African lawmakers. Now, my question there specifically was, there was an illicit tobacco task team that was set up, and that would have included representatives from the BAT, the Hawks, Crime Intelligence, the SSA, and the NPA. However, not from SARS. And my question specifically there was, do they still have that seat? Does BAT still have access to state intelligence via the seat? And it would be helpful to get a clear answer on that, Chair, as well as a clear answer from the colleague whether he is of the opinion that given the past, there is this legitimacy to make contributions in the vein that are being made now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. BAT, are you in the position to respond to that question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Chair. Sorry, before he responds, Chair, I'll just like a point of order that I think Honourable Burke's out of line. I think for his question, the legitimacy of Heineken, he's questioned the legitimacy of Johan Rupert, and similarly with BAT. We're not going to have public participation soon if we're going to start questioning the legitimacy of presenters. So that's just my viewpoint, Chair, and I think it's a dangerous ground that we're getting onto, and I think you should make a ruling on it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Bisley. we'll look at it. But if the stakeholder is in the position to respond, they can do so. If not, they can indicate. BAT.
Thank you, Chair. I think just to comment to Honourable Burke, and I think it's a fair ask by Honourable Beasley that you do look at the question around legitimacy, and I think constitutionally we would be entitled to make representations to this committee, but I would leave it in your hands. I think it's needless to say, it's the prerogative of law enforcement to deal with the illicit trade issue in South Africa, and just to touch on one point, BATS is not part of state institutions dealing with illicit trade in South Africa. So hopefully that's answered the question, and with the ask of you, Chair, around that other point, I'll hold off on commenting on it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we are done now with the presentations and engagement from the members. Then we can move to the next item. Are there announcements? Tomorrow we are meeting again, same platform, for a public hearing on TLAB and TALAB. Any other announcement? There seem to be none. Thanks very much, honorable members and stakeholders. We'll continue to engage on the discussion that we have had this morning, including the issues that has been raised by stakeholders. When SARS and National Treasury come back for responses, they will have to respond to all those issues that have been raised by members and also by stakeholders, so that this is not seen like a ticking the box kind of an exercise. The question of raising the tax above the inflation, SARS and National Treasury will have to respond to that and give the rationale as to why are they doing that, and many other issues that have been raised. So we'll come back to that when we reconvene for that session. So let's adjourn this meeting today and meet again tomorrow, same time, same platform. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
Chair.
Chair. Thanks, honourable members.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you all.